Good evening. Happy Sunday. We ran out of time. I thought we were going to finish Flatland on Thursday. We didn't. We ran out of time. So today will probably be a shorter reading session as we finish up Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by Edwin something Abbott. I don't know. He was a school teacher. I know that much. Also, as a note, keep an eye on my Twitter. I will be announcing a live show that I'll be, an actual play that I will be playing in that will be streaming soon. So make sure to keep an eye on my Twitter for announcements about that. Section 20. How the Sphere Encouraged Me in a Vision. Although I had less than a minute for reflection, I felt by a kind of instinct that I must conceal my experiences from my wife. Not that I apprehended at the moment any danger from her divulging my secret, but I knew that, to any woman in Flatland, the narrative of my adventures must needs be unintelligible, so I endeavored to reassure her by some story invented for the occasion that I had accidentally fallen through the trapdoor of the cellar and had there lain stunned. The southward attraction in our country is so slight that even to a woman my tale necessarily appeared extraordinary and well nigh incredible, but my wife, whose good sense far exceeds that of the average of her sex, and who perceived that I was unusually excited, did not argue with me on the subject, but insisted that I was ill and required repose. I was glad of an excuse for retiring to my chamber to think quietly over what had happened. When I was at last by myself, a drowsy sensation fell on me, but before my eyes closed I endeavored to reproduce the third dimension, and especially the process by which a cube is constructed through the motion of a square. It was not so clear as I could have wished, but I remembered that it must be upward, and yet not northward. And I determined steadfastly to retain these words as the clue which, if firmly grasped, could not fail to guide me to the solution, so, mechanically repeating like a charm the words upward yet not northward, I fell into a sound, refreshing sleep. During my slumber I had a dream. I thought I was once more by the side of the sphere whose lustrous hue betokened that he had exchanged his wrath against me for perfect placability. We were moving together towards a bright but infinitesimally small point to which my master directed my attention. As we approached, methought there issued from it a slight humming noise, as from one of your Spaceland bluebottles, only less resonant by far, so less indeed that even in the perfect stillness of the vacuum through which we soared, the sound reached not our ears till we checked our flight at a distance from it of something under 20 human diagonals. "Look yonder," said my guide. "In Flatland thou hast lived, of Lineland thou hast received a vision. Thou hast soared with me to the heights of Spaceland. Now, in order to complete the range of thy experience, I conduct thee downward, to the lowest depth of existence, even to the realm of Pointland, the abyss of no dimensions. Behold yon miserable creature. That point is a being like ourselves, but confined to the non-dimensional gulf. He is himself his own world, his own universe. Of any other than himself he can form no conception, but he knows not length, nor breadth, nor height, for he has had no experience of them. He has no cognizance even of the number 2. Nor has he a thought of plurality, for he is himself his one and all, being really nothing. Yet mark his perfect self-contentment, and hence learn this lesson, that to be self-contented is to be vile and ignorant, and that to aspire is better than to be blindly and impotently happy. Now listen." He ceased, and there arose from the little buzzing creature a tiny, low, monotonous but distinct tinkling, as from one of your Spaceland phonographs, from which I caught these words, "Infinite beatitude of existence! It is, and there is none else beside it." "What," said I, "does the puny creature mean by it?" "He means himself," said the sphere. "Have you not noticed before now that babies and babyish people who cannot distinguish themselves from the world speak of themselves in the third person? But hush. It fills all space," continued the soliloquizing creature, "and what it fills it is. What it thinks, that it utters, and what it utters, that it hears, and it itself is thinker, utterer, hearer, thought, word, audition. It is the one and yet the all in all. The happiness of being.
Can you not startle the little thing out of its complacency? Said I. Tell it what it really is, as you told me, reveal to it the narrow limitations of Pointland and lead it up to something higher?
That is no easy task, said my master. Try you.
Hereon, raising my voice to the uttermost, I addressed the point as follows. Silence! Silence, contemptible creature, you call yourself the all in all, but you are nothing. Your so-called universe is a mere speck in a line, and a line is a mere shadow as compared with—
Hush! Hush, you have said—
Oh, wrong character. My bad. Hush, hush, you have said enough, interrupted the sphere. Now listen, and mark the effect of your harangue on the king of Pointland. The lustre of the monarch, who beamed more brightly than ever upon hearing my words, showed clearly that he retained his complacency, and I had hardly ceased when he took up his strain again.
The joy! The joy of thought! What can it not achieve by thinking its own thought, coming to itself, suggestive of its disparagement, thereby to enhance its happiness? Sweet rebellion stirred up to result in triumph! The divine creative power of the all-in-one! The joy of being!
You see, said my teacher, how little your words have done. So far as the monarch understands them at all, he accepts them as his own, for he cannot conceive of any other than himself, and he plumes himself upon the variety of its thought as an instance of creative power. Let us leave this god of Pointland to the ignorant fruition of his omnipresence and omniscience. Nothing that you or I can do can rescue him from his self-satisfaction. After this, as we gently floated back to Flatland, I could hear the mild voice of my companion pointing the moral of my vision and stimulating me to aspire and to teach others to aspire. He had been angered at first, he confessed, by my ambition to soar to dimensions above the third, but since then he had received fresh insight, and he was not too proud to acknowledge his error to a pupil. Then he proceeded to initiate me into mysteries yet higher than those I had witnessed, showing me how to construct extra solids by the motion of solids, and double extra solids by the motion of extra solids, and all strictly according to analogy, all by methods so simple, so easy, as to be patent even to the female sex.
Section 21. How I tried to teach the theory of 3 dimensions to my grandson, and with what success.
I awoke rejoicing, and began to reflect on the glorious career before me. I would go forth, methought, at once, and evangelize the whole world of Flatland. Even to women and soldiers, should the gospel of 3 dimensions be proclaimed, I would begin with my wife. Just as I had decided on my plan of operations, I heard the sound of many voices in the street commanding silence. Then followed a louder voice. It was a herald's proclamation. Listening attentively, I recognized the words of the resolution of the council enjoining the arrest, imprisonment, or execution of any one who should pervert the minds of the people by delusions and by professing to have received revelations from another world. I reflected. This danger was not to be trifled with. It would be better to avoid it by omitting all mention of my revelation and by proceeding on the path of demonstration, which, after all, seemed so simple and so conclusive that nothing would be lost by discarding the former means. Upwards, not northwards, was the clue to the whole proof. It had seemed to me fairly clear before I fell asleep, and when I first awoke fresh from my dreams, it had appeared as patent as arithmetic, but somehow it did not seem to me quite so obvious now. Though my wife entered the room opportunely just at that moment, I decided, after we had exchanged a few words of commonplace conversation, not to begin with her. My pentagonal sons were men of character and standing, and physicians of no mean reputation, but not great in mathematics, and in that respect unfit for my purpose. But it occurred to me that a young and docile hexagon with a mathematical turn would be a most suitable pupil.
Why, therefore, not make my first experiment with my little precocious grandson, whose casual remarks on the meaning of 3 to the power of 3 had met with the approval of the sphere? Discussing the matter with him, a mere boy, I should be in perfect safety, for he would know nothing of the proclamation of the council, whereas I could not feel sure that my sons, so greatly did their patriotism and reverence for the circles predominate over mere blind affection, might not feel compelled to hand me over to the prefect if they found me seriously maintaining the seditious heresy of the third dimension. But the first thing to be done was to satisfy in some way the curiosity of my wife, who naturally wished to know something of the reasons for which the circle had desired that mysterious interview, and of the means by which he had entered the house. Without entering into details of the elaborate account I gave her, an account, I fear, not quite so consistent with truth as my readers in Spaceland might desire, I must be content with saying that I succeeded at last in persuading her to return quietly to her household duties without eliciting from me any reference to the world of 3 dimensions. This done, I immediately sent for my grandson, for, to confess the truth, I felt that all that I had seen and heard was in some strange way slipping from me, like the image of a half-grasped, tantalizing dream, and I longed to essay my skill in making a first disciple. When my grandson entered the room, I carefully secured the door. Then, sitting down by his side and taking our mathematical tablets, or, as you would call them, lines, I told him we would resume the lesson of yesterday. I taught him once more how a point by motion in 1 dimension produces a line, and how a straight line in 2 dimensions produces a square. After this, forcing a laugh, I said, "And now, you scamp, you wanted to make me believe that a square may in the same way, by motion upward, not northward, produce another figure, a sort of extra square in 3 dimensions. Say that again, you young rascal." At this moment we heard once more the heralds, oh yes, outside in the street proclaiming the resolution of the council. Young though he was, my grandson, who was unusually intelligent for his age and bred up in perfect reverence for the authority of circles, took in the situation with an acuteness for which I was quite unprepared. He remained silent till the last words of the proclamation had died away, and then bursting into tears, "Dear grandpapa," he said, "that was only my fun, and of course I meant nothing at all by it, and we did not know anything then about the new law, and I don't think I said anything about the 3rd dimension, and I am sure I did not say 1 word about upward, not northward, for that would be such nonsense, you know. How could a thing move upward and not northward, upward and not northward? Even if I were a baby, I could not be so absurd as that. How silly it is!" "Not at all silly," said I, losing my temper. "Here, for example, I take this square," and at the word I grasped a movable square which was lying at hand, "and I move it, you see, not northward, but, yes, I move it upward, not exactly like this, that is to say, not northward, but I move it somewhere, but somehow—" Here I brought my sentence to an inane conclusion, shaking the square about in a purposeless manner, much to the amusement of my grandson, who burst out laughing louder than ever, and declared that I was not teaching with him, but joking with him, and so saying he unlocked the door and ran out of the room. Thus ended my first attempt to convert a pupil to the gospel of 3 dimensions. Section 22. How I then tried to diffuse my theory of 3 dimensions by other means, and of the result. My failure with my grandson did not encourage me to communicate my secret to others of my household, yet neither was I led by it to despair of success. Only I saw that I must not wholly rely on the catchphrase, "upward, not northward," but must rather endeavor to seek a demonstration by setting before the public a clear view of the whole subject, and for this purpose it seemed necessary to resort to writing. So I devoted several months in privacy to the composition of a treatise on the mysteries of 3 dimensions, only, with the view of evading the law, if possible, I spoke not of a physical dimension, but of a Thought-land, whence, in theory, a figure could look down upon Flatland and see simultaneously the insides of all things, and where it was possible that there might be supposed to exist a figure environed, as it were, with 6 squares and containing 8 terminal points. But in writing this book I found myself sadly hampered by the impossibility of drawing such diagrams as were necessary for my purpose, for, of course,
In our country of Flatland there are no tablets but lines, and no diagrams but lines, all in one straight line and only distinguishable by difference of size and brightness, so that when I had finished my treatise, which I entitled Through Flatland to Thoughtland, I could not feel certain that many would understand my meaning. Meanwhile, my life was under a cloud. All pleasures palled upon me, all sights tantalized and tempted me to outspoken treason, because I could not but compare what I saw in 2 dimensions with what it really was if seen in 3, and could hardly refrain from making my comparisons aloud. I neglected my clients and my own business to give myself to the contemplation of the mysteries which I had once beheld, yet which I could impart to no one, and found daily more difficult to reproduce even before my own mental vision. One day, about 11 months after my return from Spaceland, I tried to see a cube with my eye closed, but failed. And though I succeeded afterwards, I was not then quite certain, nor have I ever been afterwards, that I had exactly realized the original. This made me more melancholy than before, and determined me to take some step, yet what I knew not. I felt that I would have been willing to sacrifice my life for the cause, if thereby I could have produced conviction, but if I could not convince my grandson, how could I convince the highest and most developed circles in the land? And yet at times my spirit was too strong for me, and I gave vent to dangerous utterances. Already I was considered heterodox, if not treasonable, and I was keenly alive to the danger of my position. Nevertheless, I could not at times refrain from bursting out into suspicious or half-seditious utterances, even among the highest polygonal and circular society. When, for example, the question arose about the treatment of those lunatics who said that they had received the power of seeing the insides of things, I would quote the saying of an ancient circle who declared that prophets and inspired people are always considered by the majority to be mad, and I could not help occasionally dropping such expressions as the eye that discerns the interior of things and the all-seeing land. Once or twice I even let fall the forbidden terms, the 3rd and 4th dimensions. At last, to complete a series of minor indiscretions at a meeting of our local speculative society held at the palace of the prefect himself, some extremely silly person having read an elaborate paper exhibiting the precise reasons why Providence has limited the number of dimensions to 2, and why the attributes of omnipotence is assigned to the Supreme alone, I so far forgot myself as to give an exact account of the whole of my voyage with the sphere into space, and to the assembly hall in our metropolis, and then to space again, and of my return home, and of everything that I had seen and heard in fact or vision. At first, indeed, I pretended that I was describing the imaginary experiences of a fictitious person, but my enthusiasm soon forced me to throw off all disguise, and finally, in a fervent peroration, I exhorted to all my hearers to divest themselves of prejudice and to become believers in the 3rd dimension. Need I say that I was at once arrested and taken before the council? Next morning, standing in the very place where but a few months ago the sphere had stood in my company, I was allowed to begin and to continue my narration unquestioned and uninterrupted, but from the first I foresaw my fate, for the president, noting that a guard of the better sort of policeman was in attendance, of angularity little, if at all, under 55 degrees, ordered them to be relieved before I began my defense by an inferior class of 2 or 3 degrees. I knew only too well what that meant. I was to be executed or imprisoned, and my story was to be kept secret from the world by the simultaneous destruction of the officials who had heard it, and this being the case, the president desired to substitute the cheaper for the more expensive victims. After I had concluded my defense, the president, perhaps perceiving that some of the junior circles had been moved by my evident earnestness, asked me 2 questions. Whether I could indicate the direction which I meant when I used the words upward, not northward, and whether I could, by any diagrams or descriptions other than the enumeration of imaginary sides and angles, indicate the figure I was pleased to call a cube. I declared that I could say nothing more, and that I must commit myself to the truth whose cause would surely prevail in the end. The president replied that he quite concurred in my sentiment, and that I could not do better. I must be sentenced to perpetual imprisonment, but if the truth intended that I should emerge from prison and evangelize the world, the truth might be trusted to bring that result to pass. Meanwhile, I should be subjected to no discomfort that was not necessary to preclude escape, and unless I forfeited the privilege by misconduct, I should be occasionally permitted to see my brother, who had preceded me to my prison. 7 years have elapsed, and I am still a prisoner, and, if I accept the occasional visits of my brother, debarred from all companionship save that of my jailers. My brother is one of the best of squares, just, sensible, cheerful, and not without fraternal affection, yet I confess that my weekly interviews, at least in one respect, caused me the bitterest pain. He was present when the sphere manifested himself in the council chamber. He saw the sphere's changing sections. He heard the explanation of the phenomenon then given to the circles. Since that time, scarcely a week has passed during 7 whole years without his hearing from me a repetition of the part I played in that manifestation, together with ample descriptions of all the phenomena in Spaceland and the arguments for the existence of solid things derivable from analogy. Yet, I take shame to be forced to confess it, my brother has not yet grasped the nature of the third dimension, and frankly avows his disbelief in the existence of a sphere. Hence, I am absolutely destitute of converts, and for aught that I can see, the millennial revelation has been made to me for nothing. Prometheus, up in Spaceland, was bound for bringing down fire for the mortals. I, poor Flatland Prometheus, lie here in prison for bringing down nothing to my countrymen. Yet I exist in the hope that these memoirs, in some manner I know not how, may find their way to the minds of humanity in some dimension, and may stir up a race of rebels who shall refuse to be confined to limited dimensionality. That is the hope of my brighter moments. Alas, it is not always so. Heavily weighs on me at times the burdensome reflection that I cannot honestly say I am confident as to the exact shape of the once seen, oft regretted cube, and in my nightly visions the mysterious precept, upward, not northward, haunts me like a soul-devouring sphinx. It is part of the martyrdom which I endure for the cause of the truth that there are seasons of mental weakness when cubes and spheres flit away into the background of scarce possible existences, when the land of 3 dimensions seems almost as visionary as the land of 1 or none, nay, when even this hard wall that bars me from my freedom, these very tablets on which I am writing, and all the substantial realities of Flatland itself appear no better than the offspring of a diseased imagination or the baseless fabric of a dream. The end of Flatland. So yeah, that was the 20 minutes of reading that we couldn't quite sneak in last Thursday. I will be picking up a new book on this coming Thursday, so hopefully you will join me as we find out what that book is, and thank you so much for joining me today as we had a very quick session to finish up Flatland, a romance of many dimensions. Have a good rest of your weekend, and I hope you have a good night.